Ethan sat in the dim glow of his desk lamp as the neighborhood settled into silence. Outside his window, porch lights blinked off one by one like stars dying in reverse. But Ethan was wide awake, his fingers twitching with an energy he hadn't felt in years, not since the day he left the service and tried to forget how to fight. Now, his opponent wore pearls and heels and sat behind a clipboard, but the tactics were the same: intimidation, misdirection, force through fear. He reached into the cabinet beside him and pulled out a weathered spiral notebook, the same one he used when building case files as a military investigator. Old habits die hard. Entry 1 date. May 5 incident. False violation. Lawn edging perfectly compliant. Photographic evidence saved in folder A. Potential targeting. He paused, then added, observed HOA president watching residents from window. Possible provocation. He leaned back, chewing the end of his pen. What made her pick him? What had he done? Maybe it wasn't personal. Maybe she'd run out of easier targets. Or maybe, just maybe, he was the one homeowner she couldn't scare into She didn't like the look of that. The next morning, Ethan woke to a second violation. This one was stuffed in his mailbox in a crumpled envelope, bearing the HOA seal and a single line typed in bold font. Unapproved commercial vehicle on property. Section 2D. Ethan blinked at it. Commercial vehicle. He looked out at his driveway. His truck was parked as always. A black Ford F-150. No logos, no business plates. Just his personal vehicle. Sure, it had a toolbox in the back, but so did half the trucks in the county. He snapped more photos. 10 minutes later, a red Lexus SUV slowed as it passed. Karen was behind the wheel. She didn't wave. She didn't even pretend not to stare. Just glided by like a predator taking inventory. He gave her a slight nod. She gave him nothing. When he got back inside, Ethan called the county permit office. No reports, no complaints. Nothing official had been filed. It was all coming directly from the HOA. He opened his notebook again. Entry 2 new. Violation. False. Vehicle is personal. No commercial tags. No markings. Pattern of harassment now likely. He stared at the word harassment. It felt heavy to write, but true. Something deeper than policy disputes was at play. By noon, his phone buzzed with a message from Maria Alvarez's neighbor 3 houses down. She was kind, soft-spoken, and usually stayed out of HOA drama. Her message was brief. Check your back fence. Saw her behind your yard with a camera. Ethan's chest tightened. He bolted to the backyard, scanning the fence line. No sign of anyone. But when he checked his motion camera feed from earlier that morning, there she was, Karen Bellamy, peering through the slats with a telephoto lens like some overzealous tabloid photographer. He replayed it 3 times, just to be sure. That night, he created a second folder on his desktop. Karen's surveillance evidence. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't enforcement. It was a campaign. And if she wanted war, he'd give it to her. But unlike Karen, Ethan believed in evidence, in building methodically, in crushing with facts so undeniable, not even the most corrupt HOA board could bury them. He closed his notebook, locked the files, and sat in the quiet, knowing exactly what his next move had to be. Let her play her petty games. He was going to take her queen. By the time the 3rd violation landed, this one for improper shade of blinds visible from exterior, Ethan no longer flinched. The paper was damp from morning dew, stuck to his windshield like a parasite. He peeled it off and tucked it into a folder without a word. This time, he didn't even bother to read the details. The pattern was already crystal clear. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was manufacturing them. He logged the violation in his notebook, time-stamped the photos of his blinds, then pulled out the HOA handbook. Section 3B listed, neutral tone blinds only. His were off-white. Standard issue from when he'd bought the house. Nothing had changed except Karen's obsession with targeting him. The blinds fine came with an added threat. Known compliance will result in a lien review hearing. A lien for blinds. Ethan stared at the words, his pulse thudding in his temples. It was only his 4th violation in under 2 weeks, but he knew what Karen was doing. He'd heard whispers. This was how she got rid of people. Stack phony violations. Let the fines snowball. Then pressure the homeowner into either paying thousands or walking away. And when they walked, she pounced. Ethan had seen the listings. Quiet sales. Fast closings. Community-owned resale on the paperwork. All with Karen's signature, buried in the fine print. He began to make calls. The first few neighbors were hesitant, worried. Cautious, some hung up. Others murmured things like, I'd rather not get involved. But by the 4th call, someone finally cracked. Karen, find me for a hummingbird feeder, said Dolores, a widow who'd lived there since 1995. Said it attracted pests. Then I got 3 more notices about my garden border, mailbox, and porch light. What did you do? Ethan asked. I paid. I couldn't fight. The board ignored me. I'm on a fixed income. Ethan thanked her, his voice tight. The next day, a retired Army colonel named Raymond stopped Ethan on his morning walk. I heard you're stirring the hornet's nest, he said with a grin. I'm collecting evidence. You'll need more than that. Karen's got half the board in her back pocket and the rest too scared to speak. Ethan looked him square in the eye. Then maybe it's time someone made them speak. Raymond nodded slowly. I might know where you can start. That afternoon, Ethan drove to a small law office in the next county, referred by Raymond. The attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Talia Cross, listened carefully as Ethan laid everything out. The false violations, the photos, the surveillance, footage, the neighbors' statements, the fines, the threats. When he finished, she leaned back, eyes narrow. You're not the first one who's come in with Karen's name on a stack of violations. Ethan stiffened. So she's done this before? She's a textbook HOA tyrant. But what you've got is gold. Most people come in with frustration. You came in with records, logs, footage, paper trail. If we can prove a pattern of targeted harassment and misuse of HOA authority, we could sue for damages, injunction, and maybe just maybe expose the entire board structure. Ethan felt something stir deep in his chest. For the first time, it wasn't just anger, it was resolve. I want to stop her, he said. For good? Talia's eyes gleamed. Then let's get to work. But understand, once she knows you've lawyered up, she'll come harder. She panic. And when tyrants panic, they make mistakes. Ethan stood, shook her hand, and walked out into the cooling dusk. A strange calm settling over him. Karen thought she was dealing with another passive homeowner, but she had no idea who she'd just declared war on. Ethan returned home from the law office with a storm forming behind his eyes. The streets of Evergreen Glade looked the same: tidy hedges, painted curbs, porches staged like magazine covers. But now he saw the neighborhood differently. It was a facade, the kind built by fear, stitched together with fake smiles and forged notices. The mask was cracking, and he was going to rip it off. He didn't waste time. By morning, Ethan was seated at the county recorder's office, flipping through pages of public records, his notepad open and pen scribbling furiously. He'd pulled up Karen Bellamy's name, along with Evergreen Glade's HOA entity filings. The first red flag jumped out like a flare. Over the last 6 years, 6 different homes in the community had gone into forced lien sales through the HOA. All had multiple escalating violations within 6 months before being seized, and in every one of those filings, the same 3 board members signed off: Karen Bellamy, Linda Hecht, and Davis Frawley. 2 of those homes were bought at auction by a company called Clearview Management LLC. Ethan dug deeper. Clearview Management's registered agent, Karen Bellamy. A pulse of heat shot up his spine. She wasn't just issuing phony violations. She was creating legal nooses, then swooping in to claim the homes once homeowners tapped out or were forced to walk away. All under the illusion of community governance, predation cloaked in procedure. He printed the documents and drove to Raymond's house, a tidy colonial with an American flag waving from the porch. The retired colonel answered with a steaming mug of coffee in hand. Ethan handed him the paperwork. Raymond read in silence for 2 long minutes, then looked up with steel in his gaze. She's flipping homes. She's forcing out from under people. This is racketeering with a clipboard. And nobody stopped her, Ethan muttered. She scared people into silence. And the ones who did speak out, well, she buried them in legal threats. Raymond reached into a drawer and pulled out a worn manila folder. Here, he said, handing it over. This was from a neighbor named Keith Whitmore. He tried to sue the board a few years ago. Claimed his violations were fabricated too. It never made it to court. He dropped it and moved out overnight. Ethan flipped through Keith's documents, dated photos, emails, a rejection letter from the HOA board, even a copy of a cease and desist letter from Karen's personal attorney. She'd done this before. Too many times, but not to someone like him. Back at home, Ethan uploaded everything: property records, past violation patterns, HOA meeting notes, Karen's LLC information into a master case folder labeled Operation Gladefall. He smiled grimly. It was a name he'd once given a military op. Back then, it meant breaching a compound held by corrupt warlords. The parallel wasn't lost on him. Later that evening, his doorbell rang. He expected a neighbor, maybe Maria. Instead, a man in a faded polo shirt stood there with a clipboard in hand and an HOA badge dangling from his neck. Mr. Marlowe, the man said flatly, we've received an anonymous report that your garage is being used for unauthorized mechanical work. That's a code violation under Section 5C. Ethan didn't blink. Name of the reporting party. It was anonymous, sir. Of course it was. Ethan stepped aside and gestured to the empty garage. No tools, no customers, no oil-stained floors. Just his bike and a few storage boxes. The man hesitated, scribbled something, and left without another word. Ethan closed the door slowly. She knew he was coming, and now she was tightening her grip. But it was already too late for Karen. She started something she couldn't stop. Ethan sat in the back of his truck with the tailgate down, a thermos in one hand and his eyes locked on Karen Bellamy's house across the street. He had begun parking there every morning before sunrise, watching her movements with the precision of a hunter. She followed a pattern: early walks with her dog, a brief visit to the HOA office around 9 a.m., and meetings with board members. At her house on Thursdays. On this particular Thursday, a silver sedan pulled up. Davis Frawley, HOA treasurer. Ethan clicked his pen and wrote it down. Talia Cross, his attorney, had advised patience. We need more than just documents. We need intent. Abuse of authority is hard to prove unless you catch them with the HOA powers directly. So he waited, and he watched. Later that day, Maria Alvarez texted, I got something. You'll want to see this. Ethan met her at the community park, the kind with fake grass and HOA mandated benches that looked comfortable but weren't. She came with a manila folder tucked under her arm. I'm on the Architectural Review Committee, she said, her voice low. Karen thinks I'm just quiet, not paying attention, but she's been using us to funnel certain decisions. She handed over a copy of the internal memos. Each note showed Karen had overruled committee votes on several items, including Ethan's alleged violations, before they ever reached the board. In 2 cases, she signed rejection letters with forged committee votes. She's faking our authority, Maria whispered. That's forgery. She's making it look like decisions were made democratically. Ethan felt the weight of the folder, like a live charge. You willing to testify to this? Maria hesitated. If you promise to blow this whole thing wide open, I'm not stopping until she's done. That night, Ethan wrote a new entry. Entry 6 Karen, altering internal HOA documents, overriding ARC decisions, documented memos provided by committee. Member Maria Alvarez. Forgeries confirmed. He attached copies to his now growing evidence binder. Then he connected a microphone to the edge of his garage workbench. If they were going to accuse him of illegal activity, he was going to give them nothing but proof of his innocence. Audio, time-stamped logs, security footage. He labeled everything, organized it by date, and stored backups in the cloud and on a hidden USB. He didn't want Karen to just lose. He wanted her to drown in her own lies. Then came the email. Subject, lien initiation. Final notice. It came from the HOA office, bearing Karen's name, claiming unpaid fines totaling $3,750. It gave Ethan 10 days to pay or face legal seizure proceedings on his home. She had pulled the trigger. Ethan didn't reply. He forwarded the email to Talia. That night, Talia filed a preliminary injunction with the county court. She also filed a motion for discovery compelling the HOA to turn over all correspondence regarding Ethan's violations. The same evening, Karen rang his doorbell. He opened it slowly. She stood in a crisp blue pantsuit, her arms crossed like she was posing for a courtroom sketch. You're escalating this unnecessarily, she said, voice tight. These are community standards. If you can't follow them, you might want to consider relocating. Ethan held her gaze. Then I guess we'll let a judge decide. For the first time, Karen blinked. When she turned and walked away, it wasn't with her usual smug strut. It was clipped, uneven. Her power wasn't slipping, it was fracturing. Ethan closed the door behind her, locked it, and let out a breath. The trap was set. She didn't know it yet, but the next move wasn't hers. It was his. The courtroom was colder than Ethan expected. Not physically, though. The air conditioning was turned high, but in tone. In silence, in the eyes of the people watching from the gallery, residents from Evergreen Glade had shown up. Some out of curiosity, others out of support, and a few Ethan suspected because they finally sensed the tide turning. Karen sat 2 rows ahead, flanked by her attorney, a stern man with a receding hairline and an unconvincing tie. Her arms were folded tightly. She hadn't acknowledged Ethan once. Talia stood beside him, calm, professional, and utterly surgical in her precision. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Then the gavel dropped. It had begun. Your Honor, Talia opened, this is not simply a matter of lawn disputes or blind colors. This is about the abuse of power by a private governing body. We will demonstrate that Ms. Bellamy and the Evergreen Glade HOA targeted my client with fabricated violations, manipulated internal processes, and engaged in fraudulent conduct that costs other homeowners their properties. Karen's lawyer countered blandly. The HOA acted within its legal authority. Mr. Marlowe failed to comply with community guidelines and was justly fined. Then the evidence began to speak. First came the photographs, time-stamped high resolution. Every alleged violation disproven with clear visual proof. Next, the memos from the Architectural Review Committee complete with Maria Alvarez's sworn statement confirming forged votes and overridden decisions. Then the kicker: video footage of Karen herself, crouched outside Ethan's fence line, snapping pictures like a gossip columnist with a grudge. The judge raised his eyebrows at that one. But the courtroom truly shifted when Talia introduced Exhibit G. Karen's emails, leaked from a former board secretariat in one. Karen wrote, if he wants to play hardball, I'll bury him in violations until he begs to sell. I've done it before. Another read, vets like him think rules don't apply just because they wore a uniform. I'll remind him who runs this street, the gallery murmured. Karen's jaw clenched. Talia let the words hang in the air before moving to the final blow. Management, Your Honor, a real estate LLC registered under Karen Bellamy's name. 6 former properties from Evergreen Glade were purchased by this company, homes that were forced into sale following nearly identical patterns of manufactured violations. The judge leaned forward. Karen's lawyer objected, but Talia produced the filings, the corporate registration, and the public deed transfers. All roads led back to Karen. When it was time for Karen to take the stand, she held her head high at first. "Ms. Bellamy," Talia said, her voice smooth as silk, "is it true you once fined a homeowner for having a ceramic frog statue?" Karen scoffed. "It was a distraction to the community aesthetic." "And what aesthetic is that? The one where you buy their homes after bankrupting them?" Objection sustained. "Ms. Cross, stay on track." Talia didn't need to press. The room was already shifting against Karen by the time closing arguments ended. Karen looked paler. Her arrogance was still there, but now wrapped in nervous tension. She drummed her fingers against her skirt. Her attorney avoided eye contact. The judge adjourned, promising a ruling within the week. Outside, Ethan stepped into the sunlight, the courthouse doors closing behind him like the end of a chapter. Talia stood beside him, folding her notes. "You crushed her," she said. Ethan wasn't smiling. "Not yet," he replied. He still had one move left, and it was the one Karen would never see coming. The ruling came faster than anyone expected. 3 days after court adjourned, Ethan received the call. Talia's voice on the other end was sharp, focused, but laced with satisfaction. "We won," she said. "Every count, fraud, defamation, abusive process." The judge didn't just stop the lien, he sanctioned the HOA for punitive damages. Karen's personally liable for $285,000. Ethan said nothing for a moment, the number echoing in his head. "She appealed," Talia added. "Of course she did. But the judge denied her stay of execution. She has 30 days to pay, or the judgment proceeds to collection." Ethan walked out onto his porch, past the spot where the first violation had been posted. The sun was rising, but it wasn't the same sun from that day. It felt newer, brighter, warmer. Across the street, Karen's Lexus wasn't in the driveway. He heard she hadn't gone home since the ruling. What he didn't hear, but later confirmed, was that Karen had secretly taken a second mortgage on her home to pay her legal fees. She was overly birched. The house she once used as a throne had become her anchor. 2 weeks later, a notice of default appeared in her yard. No HOA seal this time. This one was from the county official. Cold final. The home was up for public auction, and Ethan showed up. He didn't dress to intimidate, just jeans, a gray button-up, and a steady look. The auction was held at the county annex building, where 6 other properties were on the docket. Ethan waited as the others were called. Then they came to Karen's parcel 18-3, former owner, Karen Bellamy. Starting bid, $210,000. Bidders looked around. One raised a hand. Ethan raised his next. The back and forth lasted barely 2 minutes. Then, sold. To bidder number 47. Ethan signed the paperwork in silence. The clerk recognized his name, said nothing. The next morning, Karen stood on the sidewalk in front of her now former home. Her makeup was flawless, but her eyes were hollow. She screamed when the locksmith changed the front lock. She threw a framed HOA award plaque at the grass. She yelled at a moving truck, berated the crew, refused to leave. Finally, the sheriff's deputy arrived. Ethan stood down the block, watching from the same spot where she once spied on him through curtains. She saw him then. She pointed. "This is your fault." He didn't flinch. "You ruined my life." Still, he said nothing. Karen had made his life a living hell, and she'd called it community standards. Now she stood stripped of everything she'd built on lies. But Ethan had no interest in revenge. Not anymore. That afternoon, he met with a local nonprofit that supported housing for disabled veterans and underserved families. He handed them the deed. "Use it," he said, "for someone who needs it." The woman from the nonprofit stared at him, stunned. "You don't want to keep it." "I never wanted it," he replied. "I just wanted the war to end." The home that once symbolized corruption was now reborn as a sanctuary. Fresh paint, open windows, flowers blooming in the yard, real ones, not HOA-approved clones. Ethan walked through the house one last time before handing over the keys. He found one of Karen's old awards still hanging in a hallway. Outstanding Leadership, Evergreen Glade HOA. He took it down, paused, and placed it face down on the counter. Outside, kids laughed on bicycles. The breeze carried the scent of jasmine and cut grass. Evergreen Glade finally felt like a neighborhood again. But for Karen, somewhere out there, disgraced, homeless, unraveling, it would always be the place where she lost everything. And Ethan was finally free. Ethan never meant to run for HOA president. He'd joked about it once. Weeks ago, while sitting at Maria Alvarez's kitchen table with a mug of too hot coffee and a list of bylaws spread between them. "They'd never vote for me," he had said. "I'm the guy who sued them." But they did vote for him. Overwhelmingly, the residents had seen enough. At the annual HOA meeting, formerly a ghost town now packed wall-to-wall, Ethan's name was written in on 41 separate ballots. The existing board, fractured after downfall, barely mounted a defense. Linda Hecht had resigned quietly. Davis Frawley didn't even show up. And Maria? She ran to and one dot. So now Ethan sat at the head of the same long table where Karen once issued fines like commands. Only this time, the room didn't feel cold. It felt quiet, watchful, a bit hopeful. He opened the meeting with a single sentence. No more fear. There was no applause, just nods. People understood what he meant. The first motion passed was the formation of an oversight review committee, volunteer run, with no board influence. Their job was simple. Go through every violation issued under Karen Bellamy's tenure, case by case, fine by fine. What they found was worse than Ethan imagined. Photoshopped evidence, retroactively created violations, discarded appeals. One homeowner had paid over $12,000 in fines for decorative mulch and garage clutter. Another had their mailbox cited 3 separate times for the same paint chip. Each violation counted as new. 2 triple the fines. Ethan's team worked late into the night. He and Maria pored over scanned records, identifying the fingerprints of a system built on intimidation. And the victims were more than numbers. There was Mrs. Chen, whose garden gnomes were confiscated without explanation. She'd cried when Ethan brought them back still in HOA storage, wrapped in tissue like trophies. There was Carl Remington, who'd sold his house in shame after a flood of fake fines and rumors Karen spread about code violations. Ethan tracked him down in a retirement apartment 3 towns over and sent a letter with a refund check and a handwritten tacant apology. And then there were the ones they couldn't reach. Families long gone, homes flipped, stories forgotten. Ethan kept a list of names, not because he could fix everything, but because they deserved to be remembered, one by one. The HOA bylaws were rewritten. No violations without photographic proof. All board meetings must be recorded and publicly posted. Appeals must be reviewed within 14 days by a rotating community panel. Ethan refused to take a salary. Instead, he asked the HOA to hire a third-party auditor every year. Transparency over control. Some neighbors stopped him during walks, shaking his hand, thanking him. Others were still cautious. Years of damage doesn't heal in weeks. But the culture shifted. Lawn ornaments returned. Flags flew again. Kids chalked the sidewalks without threats of graffiti notices. Even Karen's old lieutenants slunk back into their homes, quiet and humbled. One evening, Maria brought over a box labeled Archive K. Bellamy. Inside were dozens of files never filed, never shared. One caught Ethan's eye. Keith Whitmore, the man who disappeared. Inside, a handwritten note in Karen's tight cursive. Keep pressure on him. He's soft. He'll crack. Ethan closed the folder. Karen hadn't just abused power. She'd hunted people, and though she was gone, her stains remained. He stood at the window, watching the sun set over Evergreen Glade. Peaceful, quiet, again, but he knew. Sometimes the only way to protect a community is to take it back from the ones who think they own it. Ethan stood in the quiet evening air, the weight of the neighborhood's transformation resting on his shoulders like the fading sun above. Evergreen Glade had been through hell, but it was finally healing. Gardens bloomed where once only fear grew. Voices that had been silenced now hummed in conversation at the park benches. The toxic grip of Karen Bellamy was gone, but peace, Ethan knew, was fragile. A week after the new HOA board meeting, a letter arrived. No return address, no signature. Just a single sentence scrawled in thick black ink. You may have won the battle, but the war is far from over. He showed it to Maria, who frowned deeply. Threats. After everything. Ethan nodded. Looks like Karen isn't finished playing. That night, Ethan's phone buzzed a blocked number. No voice. Just heavy breathing. Then silence. He sat back, heart pounding. Was she trying to scare him? To make him quit? The thought hardened his resolve. Evergreen Glade had survived worse then. 2 days later, an article appeared in the local news, an expose on HOA corruption titled, The Queen of Control, How One Woman's Reign Destroyed a Community. It detailed Karen's scheme, her forced home sales, and the lawsuit that changed everything. The piece ended with a quote from Ethan. Power is a tool, but when it's wielded without accountability, it becomes a weapon. We're proving here that no one is above the community they serve. The neighborhood buzzed with renewed energy. Phone calls came from reporters, former homeowners, and even officials promising tighter HOA regulations statewide. But even as the victories piled up, Ethan felt a shadow lingering. He couldn't shake the feeling that something remained, buried something deeper beneath Karen's rise and fall. One rainy evening, while sorting through files donated by Maria, Ethan found an old, sealed envelope, tucked inside a worn binder labeled Confidential Board Minutes. Inside was a single note in a shaky hand. If this falls into the wrong hands, Evergreen Glade will burn again. Beneath it, a list of names. Some were familiar, others were not. And at the top, in bold, was one name that stopped Ethan cold. His own. He stared, breath caught. Had someone else been pulling strings? Had the real puppeteer slipped beneath the radar while Karen took the fall? The phone buzzed again. This time, a text. Be careful who you trust. Ethan swallowed hard. Evergreen Glade was peaceful for now, but beneath the manicured lawns and quiet streets, secrets still whispered. And the war for the soul of the neighborhood was far from over.